So I want to talk about this, and this one has to do with something that has been hiding in plain sight. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, or the book series, and it's the true nature of the Weirwoods. Now, interestingly, there's been a lot of discussion of this recently, and I'm going to loop some of that into this. But basically, I have a theory about what's really going on with the Weirwoods that's a little bit different from what I've heard anyone else suggest. And I think actually explains a lot of what's going on in A Song of Ice and Fire. So in A Song of Ice and Fire, there's this idea of communing with animals, which is a process called warging. And one of the things that's interesting about it is this isn't necessarily a pure psychic ability because different people seem to have affinities for different animals. And sometimes we'll even have psychology or even physicality that's already kind of like that animal, even before they had the opportunity to reach out to it. This connects to potentially an earlier period in the history of this setting where people had traits which were more clearly associated with different of these animals. So essentially, this would be why these different noble houses in Westeros have different animal motifs on their banners. And this actually suggests what's going on with Weirwoods too. And it's actually horrifying. And what it is this. So there are these rumors in the deep lore of A Song of Ice and Fire of this ancient group of people called the Green Men, who were supposed to be these nature shamans. And one of the things interesting about the Green Men is the Green Men are described as A, being larger than humans, although smaller than giants, and B, having antlers. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this is this already suggests the Children of the Forest, who are a group who lived in Westeros theoretically in these ancient days. But something about the size description doesn't match that because the Children of the Forest are supposed to be smaller than humans. Here's what I think was actually going on. So in the earliest days of this setting, the people who were essentially put in charge of these societies that were growing up in this environment were people who were essentially tree wargs. So what they were able to do is they were able to psychically commune with plants and to thereby have the ecology support life in this environment. And so that they could help people, they could make agriculture work. But one of the tragic things that cursed this group of people is that over time, they would actually turn into trees themselves, which is why they're described as being so big and why also they're described as having antlers, where the antlers that they had, in fact, were the boughs of a tree that would burst out of their head at a certain point in their life. And that what these people would do is they would essentially have to settle themselves down at a certain point in their life and basically take root, at which point their faces would become harder and more inflexible and just kind of imprinted on the tree. And this is the true origin of Weirwoods. So there's a kind of similar concept to being a werewolf. Here we have Weirwoods. So people who become trees over the course of their lives. Now, one of the things actually interesting about this is the trees in the present day of most of the stories in the Song of Ice and Fire world have this aspect that they have white bark and red leaves, and that the faces that are there seem to be carved on and seem to be leaking a substance that's like a sap that's like blood. There's a theory that this is a kind of latter day corrupted version of the Weirwoods that only came into existence after some kind of disaster. So people were looking to restore what had once existed. And so they created an imperfect version of it, carving weirwood faces in to try to create new weirwoods or to try to get the old weirwoods to work again. So the idea is that at one point there would have been weirwoods that would have been more like normal trees with normal leaves, with these sort of faces associated with the original Green Men. One of the things that touched off a lot of speculation in the fan community is that the official A Song of Ice and Fire calendar that eventually came out for one of the years actually depicted a weirwood that looked like this in the isle called God's Eye, in the middle of God's Eye Lake, which is supposed to be the only remaining center of Green Man magic in the setting. There was also an edit to one of the books where a line that was initially supposed to be about a character on the God's Eye saying farewell to the trees eventually got edited into just saying farewell. The reason why George R.R. Martin might want to hide this is because in saying that this character is saying goodbye to the trees, it's almost like admitting that the trees are in fact the Green Men at this phase of history. And something that's even weirder than that is that this is actually George R.R. Martin's version of Ents. So the Weirwoods really are the tip of the iceberg of a lot of history in this setting. One helping explain why the situation that we're familiar with in Westeros came to be.